All right, folks, welcome. Glad to have you with us. Glad to be with you. Roger Pilon is with us. Today we're talking about the Constitution. We're starting with the Federalist Papers, which are kind of like the keys to unlock the questions that people may have about the Constitution, although there are some things that they don't cover. And Roger Pilon from the Cato Institute is here to explain it all to us. Right now, I think we were at the doctrine of enumerated powers.
That's right, and that's where we left off in the last segment, and that stands for the idea that the Constitution grants Congress only certain enumerated powers. And we see that in the very first sentence after the preamble, where the Article 1, Section 1, Sentence 1 says, all legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative power herein granted. By implication, not all power was herein granted. And again, you look at Article 1, Section 8, and you will see the main powers that Congress has. There are only 18 such powers. And then you look at the last documentary evidence from the founding period, namely the 10th Amendment, and you see this doctrine spelled out expressly. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In other words, the Constitution establishes a government of delegated, enumerated, and thus limited powers, delegated from the people, enumerated in the document, and limited accordingly. That's the main way they limited power, and the logic of it is really not complicated. It comes down to this: where there is no power, there is a right. And so that's why you didn't have a Bill of Rights added initially. They didn't think it was necessary. In fact, when in the ratification debates, it became clear that the Constitution would not be ratified unless a Bill of Rights were added, and that's one of the things the Anti-Federalists insisted upon. You had objections raised by Hamilton, Wilson, and others that a Bill of Rights was, first of all, unnecessary, and secondly, dangerous. It was unnecessary, Wilson, Hamilton, and others said, because why declare that there's freedom of speech when no power is given with which to violate the freedom of speech? In other words, you notice they were taking the doctrine of enumerated powers seriously as their main restraint against overweening government. Moreover, they added, a Bill of Rights will be dangerous. Why? Because we have, in principle, an infinite number of rights. A right to get up in the morning when you want to, a right to wear a hat, and so on and so forth. You're not going to put those in a constitution, but those are among our infinite number of rights. And so the problem you're faced with is this. By ordinary principles of legal construction, the failure to enumerate all members of a category, here the category is rights, that will be read as meaning that only those that are enumerated are meant to be protected in contradistinction from those that are not. And so it's for that reason that they wrote the Ninth Amendment, which reads, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Notice, retained by the people. You can't have what you don't first, you can't retain what you don't first have to be retained. And so when you look at the Ninth and the 10th Amendments, what you see is the same philosophy of government that Jefferson, back in 1776, had set forth in the Declaration of Independence. The idea is that each of us is free to plan and live his own life as he works his way through life, pursuing whatever values he thinks will make him happy, even if doing so may offend his neighbor, provided only he doesn't violate the rights of his neighbor, and government is there to secure those rights. So you see, the federal government has that limited power that belongs to it, the balance belonging to the states or to the people. And each of us has rights, both enumerated and unenumerated, and the purpose of government, federal, state, and local, is to secure those rights and to do the few other things that we have authorized it under the doctrine of enumerated powers to do. That's the vision that emerges. The Ninth and Tenth Amendment simply restates the vision that was first set forth in the Declaration of Independence.
If you just joined us, Roger Pilon is with us. He is the founder and director of the Cato Institute Center for Constitutional Studies. By the way, I could go on and read all kinds of accomplishments from Roger Pilon, but we've got like 3 hours to cover the entire Constitution and the Federalist Papers and the changes to the document. So you just got to go to the Cato website, cato.org, and look him up. There are just a variety of things that happened after the Constitution was written that resulted in people either altering the document or in altering the interpretation of the document. And it seems to me the biggest beating the Constitution took was primarily in the 20th century. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's progressivism at the turn of the century, and then the institutionalization of progressivism during the New Deal that turned the Constitution on its head. But, Gary, let me just illustrate the point that I was making about the doctrine of enumerated powers, because the striking thing to me is how long we lived under this constitution of limited government. The Progressive Era and the New Deal changed things radically. But let's remember, the New Deal constitutional revolution took place in 1937 and 1938. That's 150 years after the Constitution was written. For 150 years, we lived, for the most part, under limited constitutional government. And here are a couple of illustrations of how that happened. In 1794, Madison, the principal author of the document, a representative from Virginia, was faced with a welfare bill for the relief of refugees fleeing from an insurrection in San Domingo to Baltimore and Philadelphia. And he rose on the floor of the House to say, "I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that passage of the Constitution that authorizes us to expend the money of the taxpayers on this humanitarian activity." 2 years later, his colleague Giles from Virginia was faced with a similar bill for the relief of people who were suffering from a fire in Charleston, South Carolina. And he said, "Our duty is to uphold the Constitution and to abide by the oath we took to do so." So notice what they were saying. They were saying that it may be good to do these various humanitarian things, and any one of us is free to do it, to reach in his own pocket, but we have no authority to reach into the treasury to do this because we're not authorized to do it. As late as 1887, and that's 100 years after the Constitution was written, there was a bill introduced. There was a bill that was passed by Congress.
Okay, I've got to make a pause for just a second. I want to find out about this bill. 1887, you said?
Yep.
All right, we're going to find out what that was. Right now, let's get you up to date with what's going on around town and around the world. Roger Pilon, our guest, Gary Nolan Show's Zimmer Radio Network.